Well, hey, everybody. Could the times we are living in, these very times that we are actually living in, could these be the end of time? So, on this edition of the Military Wire, we are actually going to explore what geopolitical events are influencing this type of thinking. And we're going to talk with Brad Taylor about how all of this really influenced his latest book, End of Days. So, welcome to this edition of the Military Wire with Mike Schindler. I am, in fact, Mike Schindler, and this is the podcast where we interview some of America's most elite men and women who have served this country in hopes that their stories will empower you, enlighten you in some way to give you an aha moment to press on and move forward. So before we get started, I want to put a shout out to our sponsors of the show, Bone Frog Cellars and Bone Frog Coffee. Love these guys, founded by my friend, Lieutenant Commander Tim Cruikshank, who served with the Navy SEALs for 25 years. I don't have the coffee mug this time. I think my wife's cleaning it. But I can assure you there's coffee in it. I love it because they get you in the morning with the coffee and they ease you into the evening with the wine. But every time you purchase their product, a portion of it goes to one of the Navy SEAL foundations or the Legacy Fund to help the families of fallen SEALs. So be sure to check those guys out and be sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest on the interviews. So I'm excited to have Brad Taylor back. So joining me is Brad Taylor. He's a 15-time best-selling author. But aside from that, he's a retired lieutenant colonel, 21 years with the U.S. Army Infantry, also Special Forces. First Special Forces Division, I believe that Delta Force, if that's correct. You retired in 2020, Brad, 2010. After serving more than 2 decades and participating in Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, as well as some classified operations across the globe. You got a master's in defense analysis from the Naval Postgraduate School with a concentration in irregular warfare, which seems to be the world today. So, Brad, welcome back to the Military Wire.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah. So I've heard multiple times, we've had some guests on the show, Brad, where they have said, you know what, for sure, end of days are fast approaching. And I really want to unpack that. I want to unpack that thinking, the geopolitical events that are going into that. But before we dive into that, you've got such an impressive military career. I want you to share with our viewers, first of all, what inspired you to get involved with our military?
Actually, I wasn't inspired to get involved in the military. I was a student at the University of Texas, and I was doing horribly. I was a very bad student. I was the son of an Air Force vet, and my father told me, "You flunk out of school, you're going to the Army." And I actually was like, "I'm flunking out of school. I'm going to the Army." I was 18 years old, but I'm still my father's son. And so I was like, I guess I got to go in the Army. So I started researching the Army, and it didn't look that bad. I grew up on a farm, hunted all the time, camped all the time. I'm like, they're going to pay me to jump out of airplanes and run around with a gun? That doesn't sound so bad. So my second freshman year, as I call it, I joined ROTC and ended up in the Army.
No kidding. Wow. So, and then you had a successful career after that, doing some pretty amazing missions, I would say. You transition out of the military and you become a best-selling author, right? That's how your transition went. What was your transition like out of the military?
Actually, it was kind of a rough transition. I served in a special mission unit in Fort Bragg for close to a decade, most of my military career. I was gone, all the time. And I finished up squadron command, and came time to do the next assignment. And I said, I want a break. And so I took a job at the Citadel here in Charleston, South Carolina, teaching the cadets. That it was supposed to just be a break. But I got down here, and it was, you talk about leaving where I went to where I was. I had more time on my hands than I could care to think of. I developed exercises. I did adaptive leadership exercises in downtown Charleston. I did all kinds of stuff, just trying to keep my hands busy. And one day I told my wife I'm going to write a book, and she said, "Okay, whatever." And the book sold. and I had a kind of a crisis going on because the book sold. Because I couldn't publish it if I was going back into the special mission unit world. It wouldn't happen. And I came out on the list for bird colonel. My daughter was entering high school. My wife had gone to 4 high schools in 4 years because her dad was in the military. My next assignment was to Southwest Asia unaccompanied for 2 years. Had a lot of choices to make. And I said, let me give writing a try. And so I turned down the promotion and put my retirement paperwork in. It was not an easy decision, though, I'll tell you that.
Wow. You know, and it's so amazing because that decision right there, I mean, that catapulted you to a, 15-time, best-selling author. Your books are amazing. As I shared with you prior to, us going live, was love this book.
Thank you.
It's so incredible. So through your series, you've brought Pike Logan, these Pike Logan adventures to life, essentially. There's a couple characters I absolutely love in this latest book. I won't reveal that, but let's talk about how you land on the plots of your book, because I think there's some, aspiring writers out there, but your books are so engaging. But how do you land on the plots of each of your books?
Each one is different. Sometimes it's a news story that piques my interest. For instance, the widow strike, which we're all in coronavirus now, which I wrote about, about 8 years ago. There was a news story that the H5N1 virus, the avian flu, is incredibly deadly to humans. It's 40% deadly, which is wildly more killing than coronavirus right now we're dealing with. But it doesn't transmit easily. You can't get it unless you're dealing with birds and their guts and things like that. You don't really get it. But if you get it, you got a 40% chance of dying. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
And so everybody was saying this thing's going to mutate. We've heard Omicron, all these mutations going on. Well, back in the day, they were saying this thing's going to mutate. And when it does mutate, it's going to cause a problem. And so these guys actually mutated the virus to make it airborne, and then wanted to publish it in a book or in a journal. And we said, at the time, I'd never even heard of this guy, but now everybody's heard of him. Anthony Fauci was in charge of this organization and said, you can't publish that. If you publish that, you're basically publishing a bioweapon. You cannot publish that. And I read that story and said, that's a book. I'm going to write a book about that right now. And for this one, it was actually kind of a confluence of events. So I did research. I always want to go overseas and travel and see the ground. What we say in the military, sight, sound, smell of the battlefield. You want to be on the ground before you do a patrol so you can see what's going on. Well, that's the way I do book research. I'd like to say I could do book research just by looking at Google Maps, but I can't. I have to get on the ground. And so I'd been all over the world. And this book, I couldn't get on the ground. Well, 3 books before, I had been doing research in Morocco and Spain, and I had a 2-day layover in Rome. And I found out about this organization called the Knights of Malta, we were doing a Segway tour, believe it or not, just Great American Tours. And this car came by with diplomatic plates, and they said, I said, who's that? And they said, oh, that's the Knights of Malta. And I was like, what? Never heard of them. Who is it? And so I got a class on them, then went to the Magisterial Palace, did more research on them. And I said, sooner or later, I'm going to use them in a book. And now I have.
Yeah. So this, it's so interesting because this book, and again, I don't want to give it, it's so compelling, but it puts Israel right smack dab in the center. Tell us a little bit about the plot line. I certainly want people to pick it up. It's so engaging. I'll just tell our listeners that I read this thing in 4 days. I've got a busy schedule, but I found time to read it. I took notes on it. As I said, there were some real life events that you reference here. And I think with each of your books, I always think, that could possibly happen. So you always foreshadow. So I think if something is going to happen, Brad, I'm thinking somebody probably read your book, but tell us a little bit about the centralized plot of this book and why readers should actually pick it up.
Yeah, I think Well, the hardest part about the book, to be honest with you, is yeah, I write about current events. And the problem with current events is they're current. But the book
Yep.
doesn't come out for a year. And so I was dealing with COVID. Do I write? I mean, there's two schools of thought. I've had friends of mine, Mark Green, I'm not writing about COVID. Other people saying, I was like, okay, COVID's real. It's here. How am I going to deal with it? And so I started looking at how people move around the world. Americans couldn't go anywhere. Israelis could. I had Aaron and Shoshana who could move around if they gave the passports to Pike and his crew. And so as a germ of idea was I started reading about the Knights of Malta. And as I went further into where they came from the Crusades, just as a short history, that Knights of Malta have been around since the Crusades. And by sovereign law, legal precedent, they're a sovereign country, but they own no terrain. They've been around since the Crusades. They own no terrain. They have their own passports. They have their own currency. They have their own stamps. They have a seat at the UN. Most people have heard of the Knights of Templar. That's kind of things people talk about. Well, the Knights Templar were burned at the stake by the Pope. The Knights of Malta understood to be number 2 was the best place to be, never be number 1. And so the Knights of Malta got all the land and gold and everything else the Knights Templar was given to them. And they had been growing forever. And now some people say, I gave them short shrift, and I hope I didn't, because they're a humanitarian organization now. They do a lot of hospital work. They're really good people. But they have a lot of conspiracy theories about them. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to make them the bad guy. I'll make somebody in them the bad guy.
And you did too. And I love how you set that up too. It's so interesting. I mean, I got intrigued by the whole, the Knights of Malta. And it made sense how you set this whole thing up. I mean, it's a phenomenal book. I'm going to encourage people to pick it up. This latest book, it comes out here in January. So this is January of 2022. It's coming out here in a few days. Is that right, Brad?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, next Tuesday.
Yeah. So how do people get a hold of the book?
Well, anywhere.
Anywhere. Yeah.
Barnes & Noble, Amazon, anywhere books are sold. It's there.
Yeah, no, it's so great. Well, I always ask that question because sometimes people are like, no, you got to go directly to my website, but it's such a great book. I don't want to leave our viewers hanging because I kick this off and saying, geopolitical events that seem to be adding up to the end of days. You run with this thread in this book, End of Days. Couple things. How did you land on the title of End of Days?
Actually, we went around and around about that. And the original title was Road to Armageddon, because the book ends at Megiddo, which is an actual real place in Israel, which is actually, depending on what archaeologists you talk to, has been the most fought after terrain in the history of the world. But in the Bible, Megiddo is known as Armageddon. And so my publisher didn't like that title. And so we went back and forth, and I said, well, it's talking about the end of days, basically what it's talking about. And he liked that title.
And so that's how you guys landed on it. So you say you write about current events, but do you think this is foreshadowing in some ways? I mean, we've had some folks on here. We had Chief of Chaplains on here before that said, I think we are in end of days. You come out with a book, End of Days. Are you seeing, things line up that, potentially maybe we are in end of days?
In the biblical sense?
Yeah, sure. In the biblical sense, but even in the political sense, or even on a national sense. Yeah.
No, I don't. I think that there are tons of people who actually believe that. And I did a ton of research for this book.
Yeah.
In the Civil War, they were looking at the book of Revelations and saying, this is it. It's the end of days. Here it comes. Here's what this guy said, this guy said that. It's all coming. There's plenty of religions that have been born. Seventh-day Adventists were born out of dispensationalism, which is the end of days. The Branch Davidians in Waco, end of days. It's happened forever. No, it's not the end of days. It's somebody believes that stuff. Yeah. And somebody's going to execute what he thinks is going to get him the end of days. I mean, the Heaven's Gate cult was the same thing. It's the end of days. Everybody come in here and drink some poison. Jim Jones.
Yep.
Days. This is, I'm bringing about the end of days. No, I don't think it's the end of days. I think that the book is about a guy who does believe that, a guy who is like those people. And he's doing something that's evil, but no, I don't think the end of days is coming. No.
Yeah, no, it's so great. Well, it's, and I think that just gives people hope as well. So, Brad, sometimes, especially with coronavirus, everything that's been adding up, the things that happen in Israel, certainly things, it gives reason for people to dive into these.
Well, Israel's backed off from the end of days. If you want to know
that's probably true, right? Yeah. Well, this is so good. I love this book. I just want to say straight up, love it. I'm going to encourage all our listeners to get it, pick it up now. So if you're interested in getting Brad's book, just go to Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any place you buy books, you can get that book. It comes out here January 11th, if I'm not mistaken, of 2022.
And you can actually, if you go to my website, bradtaylorbooks.com, you can read an excerpt of that book and basically every book I've written. See if you get a flavor for it and see if you like it.
Yeah, love it. So great. Well, Brad, thank you for being on the Military Wire. Appreciate it. And for those who are interested in figuring out what your next mission purpose service is after your military service, reach out to us here at Operation Military Family or the Military Wire. And Brad, again, thanks again for being on the Military Wire.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.